All right, everyone. We are nearing the end of our conference, but we're not quite there yet. So I'm going to go ahead and begin our Kennan Institute Roundtable. You might have seen me running around this conference for the last 3 days, but I will introduce myself again. I am Lera Toropin. I am an alumni of the LBJ School of Public Affairs, the Liberal Arts UT CREASE Russian Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. I am a co-host of the Slavic Connection podcast, and I am currently a program coordinator with the Kennan Institute. So we're going to get right into it. The purpose of this roundtable is to have a collaborative discussion on how institutes, both professional and academic, have helped and have been helping and supporting independent media, exiled journalists, journalists that are in a diaspora, those that are domestically persecuted, and helping them communicate their perspectives and publish their work, especially to their home country. So for today, our focus will kind of stay on Russian and Afghani points of view, because that is where kind of our focus lies. Rather than give you full intros to our amazing panelists, I want to give them all about 5 minutes to sort of introduce themselves and discuss the work that they have been doing in their respective organizations or institutions. And in Saleha's case, we will be hearing about her experience as a journalist in exile herself. So to kind of kick this off, I'm going to turn it to my coworker and friend Lenny Lopatto to discuss a little bit about the Kennan Institute and what we do there.
Okay, thank you so much, Lera. As you said, I'm Lenny Lopatto. I am a Kennan Institute program coordinator as well. I work on our digital outreach, and I'm part of the team that publishes our blogs. Today, I want to talk about our newest publication and our current only publication that publishes entirely in Russian, which is Innymi Slovami, or in other words. It's just some background about the Kennan Institute. We're a congressionally chartered think tank at the Wilson Center in DC. Typically, our programming is meant to increase U.S. understanding of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the surrounding region. As part of our work, we have an extensive network of Russian journalists. We've covered Russian independent media, restrictions on freedom of expression. And basically, after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, this network was, for the most part, scattered across the world. And we realized that we had a special insight into this group of Russian journalists in exile in particular. And we decided that we should start a Russian language only publication in order to share their experience and give them a platform to share their views. So basically, to describe the project, Innymi Slovami was launched in September 2022. The editor-in-chief is Roman Super, who is an established journalist as well as a Kennan Institute alum. We currently publish about 2 to 3 pieces a week, and they range from personal perspectives to political commentary to Roman's ongoing interview series with Russians who are outside of Russia to get their perspective on how they got there and what they've been doing since they left. We publish other blogs and occasional papers. This is different in a number of ways, including language, but also in content. Our English language publications are mostly analytical. They're policy commentary. They're aimed at decision makers. In other words, mostly publishes personal narratives. And our audience is only Russian speakers, which is absolutely not who we're usually talking to. Usually we're talking to Americans or English speakers in general. And I can share some metrics since we've launched a little less than a year ago. We've had about 750,000 unique visitors to the site, which for us is pretty outstanding. A little over half comes from Russian IP addresses, and those are people who are still sharing their location data online. And other significant portions of people are coming from Germany, Israel, US, Ukraine, UK, Belarus, Kazakhstan. So the stories are being picked up and shared across places where usually I do not track metrics, like Telegram, Kontaktia, and the Klasniki. And I want to highlight a few pieces to talk about the successes and the challenges that have come with this kind of program. So the first piece I want to highlight has been our most popular by far. It is an interview with Roman Super with a lady named Natalia Saprunova, who before the war was the director of a school in Moscow. She was a trained mathematician. This Moscow school had a stellar reputation. It was known for one of the best places to send your kid if you wanted them to learn math. And basically, she left less than a week after the full-scale invasion started, along with 75% of the school's instructors, and about 50% of the student population. This piece got well over 500,000 views It was not only our most popular publication from the Kennan Institute, but for a while it was the most popular thing on the Wilson Center website by far. The title of the piece is "I Left So As Not to Lie to the Children," and it comes from a question that Roman asked Soprunova what she would do if she were still in Moscow, and she said that there was no possibility she would teach because of her personal integrity. And she drives home at the end of the day that she left not only for the children that she instructed, but because she's a mother to 4. And her quote is that we left to save them, to educate them. My first and foremost responsibility is to my family, no matter how much responsibility I feel to my students. It's hard, but it's right. And I think that this piece demonstrates 2 strengths that can explain why it was so popular. One is that, the mental gymnastics that people may go to stay in Russia or to try to maintain personal safety or mitigate personal risk. It's a lot on adults, but when they think about possibly their children having to do the same thing, their tolerance is a lot less. It's a pretty universal desire that our children have a better life than we had. But also, it strongly counteracts messaging from the Russian government about people who have left since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. If you listen to what Putin says, people who have left, which is, I estimate, around 1 million Russians, they're better off without them. He says basically to hell with them. Their loyalties were always elsewhere and we're stronger without them. And then you hear from this lady who says, I teach your children. I try to give them a healthy environment. I have their best interests at heart, and there's absolutely no way I could stay after this invasion started. Now, that's a success. I also want to talk about the significant challenges that come with publishing Russian journalists, even on a very small scale, as we are, admittedly. So about 2 months after we started this project in November 2022, the Russian government declared the Wilson Center an undesirable organization. Now, to Americans, that doesn't mean much, except maybe, we got a lot of congratulations, which that's appreciated, but really the consequences mostly fell to our Russian colleagues, and not even in particular the ones who are writing for this piece, but the ones on our staff, or the academics who are still teaching students in Russia and who still maintain contacts with us. As a result, the publication went offline for about 2 weeks. We reached out to all of our staff members, all of our contributors who were affected. We said, do you want us to remove things? We were totally giving people the option to cut affiliation with us. Yeah, absolutely. Nobody did. Everybody wanted to keep working with us, which I appreciate. And I can't tell you for sure the immediate cause. I can tell you about 2 weeks before, we published a piece by Ilya Zhigulov, who has been covering Russian domestic politics since the early 2000s. And he had written about Russian oligarchs who were behaving in ways that one could say were inconsistent with support for the war. And one of the oligarchs mentioned emailed us directly to let us know that he had read the piece. So people have Google or Yandex alerts set up for their own names, absolutely. And 2 weeks later, we were an undesirable organization. So I can't draw exact causation, but it's suspicious. And it really shows the non-systematic way that sanctions are introduced in Russia. It seems to be based on catching the attention of the wrong person at the wrong time. And basically, tit for tat, Russians tended to introduce measures proportional to American sanctions introduced on Russians. So to summarize, we've had positive outcomes from this project. We've reached a large audience in a population that's considered pretty hard to reach. And we've even had republication in other outlets, both with and without our permission. And it provides, to me, the most important thing is it provides a space for collective sense-making among a population that has been dispersed both physically but also left sort of mentally isolated. Social fabrics are breaking apart among Russians. So we've, in particular published a mix of new Russian emigres and old Soviet emigres who can talk about their experience. And it gives people who are isolated, a chance to talk about what kind of society they want, what they want to be part of, who to ask for help, and what exactly they want to ask for. And in particular, it involves Russians in conversations that a lot of us are having about Russians, but without Russians. So while there are challenges, I see tremendous value in maintaining a connection with this diaspora community, in particular when we think long-term about what we want to see come next, about this very long-term thinking about future of US-Russia relations. We have a community here that wants to return home to Russia and wants to return home to a society that is different than they left it.
Thank you, Lenny. We're going to turn our attention to Robin Lerner, President and CEO of the Texas International Education Consortium. The floor is yours, if the mic works.
Does it work?
Yes, good. Okay. Hello, good afternoon. I'm thrilled to be here. I love the diversity of this panel. I think we all have very different perspectives that we're bringing here. So I do run the Texas International Education Consortium. We are a consortium of universities, about 35 universities, public and private in Texas, and we have a number of affiliate universities, affiliate members overseas. And one of the reasons I'm here is because right as the U.S. was withdrawing its final troops from Afghanistan, my board approved an emergency fellowship to create a soft landing and a strong start for Afghan professionals who were being resettled in the United States on a moment's notice. And one of the things I really wanted to do was place women primarily, and really my hope was journalists, into positions, into professional residencies at universities. My bent on that was because previous to this role, I had worked for about 15 years in Washington and for embassies overseas, working a lot in public diplomacy. I also worked for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee I mentioned earlier, if anyone was here at an earlier panel. Was a lead staffer for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, overseeing all of our public diplomacy programs, as well as refugee issues and women's issues, and was quite active on supporting women in Afghanistan programs toward women. And like many of us, we felt like, oh my God, was this our fault? All these women have been aspiring toward greatness and doing wonderful things, and now what will they do? So I have since the withdrawal and the resettlement of so many into this country, I've been part of many groups of higher ed institutions talking about what is our place, what is their place in creating refuge and creating a platform for these voices in exile. And it's an interesting question because brain drain is real and nobody wants to be a part of that. But we also, higher ed institutions are places of learning and research. And Saleha, I hope, will talk about her research, but one of our other fellows is also archiving the role of women in Afghanistan over over all of history. And so we do need to have that kind of body of knowledge that only universities really they're the best place for that. But when we think about journalists in exile, I think about the reasons that we want to support them. A lot of that does come back to the work of supporting civil society and democracies in other countries. And we know that I think our U.S. government assistance programs that I used to oversee, really, they sort of embody that the role, our particular type of democracy sees the role of free press as incredibly strong. And so, can we still support that from journalists here? And we can talk about this more, but that I felt it was very important to make an effort to find a place for journalists to have safety and existence, and then to, once in peace, be able to conduit back to their home countries. So we'll talk about that more. Thank you.
I think that's a perfect time to transition to Saleha, if we have her on the Zoom call.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you for joining us, Saleha. So I just want to very quickly intro you before you talk about yourself. You're an award-winning journalist from Kabul. You're now at Texas Tech working on your master's degree. Could you tell us a little bit, not only just about how you got here, but about your career and achievements? We definitely want to kind of take some time to talk about you.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I am Saleha Soadat, a journalist from Afghanistan. My journey began as a young child, eager to learn and attend school. However, the Taliban's arrival in 1996 shattered my dream. They forbade girls from going to school and imposed strict Islamic dress codes on women. Despite this, my father secretly taught me how to read and write at home and fueling my passion for education. With the arrival American troops in 2021, doors of schools and universities opened to Afghan girls like me. I seized this opportunity and pursued my education. Eventually, I selected journalism as my field of study. I wanted to use my profession to amplify the voice of Afghan women and girls globally. As you know, as a female journalist in a conservative society like Afghanistan, my career was very challenging. yet I continue covering current affairs and socio-political news every day. Over a decade, I was working with local channel TV in Afghanistan for more than 5 years. It's called Tolo News. It is very famous in Afghanistan. I established myself as a prominent journalist in Afghanistan. However, the Taliban resurgence in 2021, August 15, changed everything. And as an Afghan woman, I feared my safety and experience and a harrowing evacuation process. I was evacuated from Afghanistan to the United States. Thankfully, the American people offered refuge to me and others like me. Now I am in the United States pursuing a master's degree at Texas Tech University. Through my research project, I am to study the role of women in press and media in Afghanistan. I have also published articles on the plight of Afghan refugees titled Broken Winged Birds, Afghans in Exile. It is part of a special Borderless magazine. As you know about our situation in Afghanistan, well, many Afghan journalists who were evacuated to the United States and EU have been provided temporary shelter like me, food and medical care, while applying for asylum or another immigration status. But some are struggling to find stable employment in their fields, like me, and may have to resort to survival jobs like driving for ride-hailing services. And despite this challenging, many Afghan journalists are determined to continue reporting on the situation in Afghanistan, like me, and ongoing support from governments and non-profit groups and the wider public will be crucial in helping them establish themselves and continue their work. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Saleha. Thank you for, telling us a little bit about yourself. So we're going to move on to our last but not least, Marlene Laruelle, Director of the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at George Washington University.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, I would like to share what we have been doing on our side and the kind of thinking that we have related to the issue of Russian scholars in exile. And so the existing, mechanisms to help scholars are very much kind of individualized, right? It's really kind of scholar at risk. It's about rescuing the most prominent globally scholars that may be in difficulties. But when we saw the scale of the immigration coming from Russia, many of us had the impression that it was only a very limited solution to rescue only few individuals, and there was no sustainability with that system because it's helping people for a kind of pretty short period of time, and that doesn't really necessarily help them to kind of find long-term survival. And anyone who has been on the kind of fellowship or grant system knows how much it's consumed time in kind of finding new opportunities for the following years. And our vision was also that the scale of the Russian academic immigration is so big that the issue is not to rescue individual people, but to try to rescue the professional communities in themselves. Right? So how to try to build a system where those who have been immigrating will be able to continue not only to exist as individual scholars, but to work in their professional community, not to lose the links they have with their colleagues. Some of them have left, some have stayed home. So how do we try to sustain that? And of course, in a sense, the fact that we had to go through, all of us, through COVID before that helped in imagining and visioning how professional community can be digital. Professional community. one element that I also would like to emphasize is that all the existing mechanisms for helping scholars are usually to help, the ones that are the best integrated in the world academic community, those who speak English, those who can publish in, peer-reviewed journal, who are known to the Western academic community, who have been traveling, who have worked, and colleagues who are supporting them. The question is that if you want to really help Russia and Russians who are living, but also the students who are staying at home, there is a need to help people who may not be connected very well to the international community, scholars who English is not very good, who have been publishing in kind of second or third tier level journal, who don't have this kind of wide network of support. And so the question is, how do we help all this professional community to continue to exist, knowing that for some of them, it's about, the quantity of people we can help and not only the quality of the best of them or those who are the most integrated. And it's also that for many of them, teaching is the main element. And usually grants are given for research, but not for teaching. And so I think there have been globally in the field of Russia study research, a lot of kind of collective thinking about how we can help this professional community continue to exist, how we can help them relocate as a group, to continue their teaching commitment, how can they reinvent themselves abroad while still being able to stay in touch with their students who studied in Russia. And so there have been several different initiatives in the so-called post-Soviet space. Many people went to Armenia and Kazakhstan. And for example, Armenia has been thinking a lot about, how to become the host of kind of not only individual scholars, but collective groups. There have been different projects. There is a Master of Russian Studies taught in Russian that will be probably which is in the process of being launched in Prague. So how to continue to teach in Russian to students who want to study, so to Russian students themselves who immigrated. What we did here at the George Washington University is that we got funding to launch what we call the Russia Program Global Academy. And so we offer non-residential fellowship for Russian scholars in immigration wherever they are. Because the point is really not to try, to have them coming to the US, and we really don't want to participate in any kind of brain drain, but to have people staying wherever they have landed, depending very often on their kind of individual trajectory, family trajectory, and giving them some small amount of money that complement the local, small fellowship they may have, but that help them kind of staying in touch with the community by, funding, access to conferences, editing to be published in English. And we also try specifically to highlight people who exist as a group, like as a professional community, who continue to work online to different groups or who do research at the community, right? Because when you have to immigrate, it's such a kind of really taking all your energy to try to integrate in the new environment and try to be competitive in this new environment that it accelerates the loss of links with your professional community. And we think it's something that will be on the long term very damageable. So we want to help Russian scholars to stay in touch with other Russian scholars with whom they were used to work in Russia, so that they can continue at least digitally their collaboration. And we also try to emphasize in our funding, specifically helping Russian scholars who are in immigration, but who are teaching online to Russian students who stayed in Russia. Right? Because I think we need to realize that immigration is a big thing now for Russia academia, but many people are staying at home. And we were discussing in the Kennan presentation, all the ethical dilemma about how do you teach to Russian students if you stay in Russia now. Some people make the ethical choice of leaving because they consider they cannot lie to their students. Some make another as ethical, I think, decision to stay and to try to continue to teach as much as possible what they consider be a critical perspective to what is going on to their own students or who stay for family reasons. So you still have a lot of people based in Russia who don't want to lose the contact with those who have left. So these links continue to exist. If you think about, for example, the Free University, they are still teaching to several tens of thousands of students There are several other smaller initiatives that continue to teach to at least thousands of students in Russia. And so I think one of the kind of long-term thinking to help this kind of Russian scholar diaspora is to help them continuing existing as professional community and help them continuing being in touch with those who study in Russia, and especially with the students in Russia who are still in very much asking for receiving a critical perspective on what is going on. And I think on many aspects, it has overlap with the discussion we were just having on Afghanistan, also with the difference that you still have big Russian academic communities staying in Russia while they are getting destroyed in Afghanistan. So it's very briefly to give you the kind of the global thinking that has been going on around our global academy and the kind of very modest way we were trying to address these challenges. Thank you.
I think that is so marvelous what I'm hearing from both of these institutions, what you're doing. And several things come to my mind juxtaposed when I think of Afghanistan, because in this country, especially, I mean, you have, people are studying Russian. Russian is a major language. There are many students who still study Russian. My sister was a Russian major, pre-med, dreamed of being a physician on the International Space Station. I mean, like therapy, and like if you look at public diplomacy, so many crops of our public diplomacists came out of Russian language programs. And and also in Ukraine and Russia, there is a major history of high academic achievement, reaching very high levels of PhDs in research and writing and publishing. When you look at Afghanistan, there's very little diaspora here in this country to support. For many reasons, people-to-people programs from Afghanistan were severely limited during the past 20 years because of concerns of overstay or of seeking asylum. So there was a lot of concern with having having too many students coming from Afghanistan. We have very few Fulbright scholars that were here. We also we had this situation of women. Right? Women, when I was faced with creating this fellowship, a university, the first thing they're going to say, if you say, I've got funding for a fellow or a graduate research, some kind of adjunct fellow, they're going to say, well, do they have a PhD? And I'm going to say, well, of course they don't have a PhD. No. Do they have a master's? No. They have 25, 30 years of incredible experience and a diverse voice. We have to rethink how we measure the value of an individual to diversify our campus and really teach our students. But it's a struggle. So even however many graduate students who are graduating from Afghanistan overall, imagine the percentage that were women. And so we've got to do extra to really support. And I want to say also, Marlene, something you said really made me think about this, because you're really talking about these are active working journalists. They don't need training programs. So much of our assistance programs is training journalists. They need to know how to get a network. They need to know how to succeed in the workplace in the United States, or to network with the right people here so they can stay where they are, or network around the world, stay where they are and continue to write, but they've got to have a bigger network. And so I think those are the kinds of things we have to really think about in our support.
I think this conversation is touching on a very interesting thing that needs to be unpacked a little bit, in that there is no one-size-fits-all solution to supporting these journalists and these civil society organization activists that are now in exile or being repressed domestically. You need to, apply these bespoke approaches to what they need, and the context changes even just from country to country, from person to person. So I kind of want to also throw it back to Saleha here, and sort of, in your journey to come here, what support were you provided with? And, in that sort of same sense, what else are you looking for while you're here and, trying to produce your work as well as, finish your master's degree?
Sure. As you know about the situation, evacuee, I mean people who came from Afghanistan, especially women who activists or journalists. For me, when I left my country with a single backpack at the midnight, with unnecessary documents, and when I came in US, even I didn't know what is my destination. When I arrived in US, the procedure was if you want to release from base, because at the beginning I was in Fort McCoy, it was a military base. The procedure was when you want to release from base, you have to find some sponsor. And because I didn't have any family member here and friend, and I was looking to find someone to give me a shelter. Finally, I found a guy. He's from Afghanistan, and he's also a journalist. And he came from Afghanistan to the United States around 5 years ago. And I contacted with social media with him, and I requested from him give me a shelter. And hopefully, he gave me a shelter, and I came from Wisconsin to Chicago. He's living in Westmont, the suburb of Chicago. When I was at the beginning, because of the language, because of the system, because of the culture, environment, everything was new for me, and I didn't know what is going on here and how to find my way. From morning until midnight, I was searching and I was Googling and to make my contact and to find my way. And finally, at the beginning, I found a couple of ESL class, and because I needed to learn English. And after a couple of weeks, and I found a couple of ESL class. It was from church community, and I was busy with ESL class. And I continue to communicate with some organization, especially who run by some women. And finally, one day, after 5 months, when I was Googling and I found there is a website, it was belonged to the Texas Tech University, and it announced we have some specific scholarship for Afghan women who came from Afghanistan, who came recently from Afghanistan. And I fill out the application. Hopefully, I success. And in 2022, on August, I came from Chicago to the Lubbock. And I started my master in mass communication in Texas Tech University. Include of my master, I have a big project. It is about the history of female journalists in Afghanistan. It is like a book. I am research assistant. I am working with Dean College of Media Communication. And I am researching from 1919 until 2023, until when the Taliban take over of Kabul. As you know, it is very tough when you left everything, when you lost everything. When you come a new country, you don't know what is going on and how to find your way. For me, even for me, because I'm educated, can you imagine for some other people, they don't know the language or they don't know, they are not educated. It's very difficult. And hopefully, and I think I'm very lucky to support from Tech, especially I would like to thank you from Robin. She is such a nice lady, and to create this scholarship for Afghan women. And I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I feel like, from that story, like Saleha is clearly just a wonderful success story that we can look at, but I want to turn to maybe Marlene and then Robin or Lenny, if you want to jump in, of what more can we do? What can we do better? Because obviously this is a field that is expanding. There are new demands every single day. There's always something that changes at the drop of a hat. So what is the way forward from here? Marlene, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of initiative already going on. So my vision is that we need more coordination about what has been existing, especially for those of us who are in the US. I mean, the majority of initiative, at least the one that are related to Russia, are happening in Europe. And so I don't think we should be reinventing the wheel in the US, and especially not trying to bring too many people here because it's costly, it's difficult to get visa. But I think we should be supporting already existing initiatives that are coordinating all the mini initiative already existing in Europe. There are many things happening in Central Europe, many things happening also in the kind of southern post-Soviet state, the South Caucasus, Central Asia. And I think we need to kind of help reinforcing capacities of the countries that are receiving already the majority of the Russian scholarly immigration, because they are the one who have the majority of Russian immigrants, but they are also the one for whom it's the most difficult financially. And I think there could be a lot of kind of positive trend, like cooperating with Armenian, Georgian, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, or Balkanic universities in helping them integrating these Russian immigrant communities, but also reinforcing their own academic communities and being sure that we help creating this kind of digital net of all the existing initiatives. They are already really kind of big structure. I mean, Free University is already a big structure. They have like 200 classes online that are offered. You have, European University in St. Petersburg, Shaninka. There are a lot of big Russian institutions who are almost preparing or immigrating as a group. And so I think we should be really thinking at that size, really like a kind of networking mechanisms more than kind of trying to help with kind of mini localized, individualized solution, but trying to have this kind of holistic view to help what is already happening in Europe.
Well, I'm going to speak more about Afghanistan. I think for many Americans, we grew up during the Cold War, and Russia is something that is Russia, the former Soviet Union. These are things that we think we kind of know, right? Afghanistan, I think that it's 9/11 and it's women. And those are the things that bring our hearts into Afghanistan. But there's a difference in that in Ukraine, we all know what the policy solution is and we're doing it, right? Which is we're supporting, and we make debate all day about whether it's done well and it's done enough. But we don't know what we can do right now in Afghanistan, right? We've just left and we're watching it now be taken over by a complete opposite type of government than that we want, and that is good for that country. But there's a helplessness, and I worry in this post-COVID era where everyone's in overload that we can't keep people engaged. And so I do. Saleha hasn't mentioned this, but she has something like 150,000 followers on Twitter, and she writes. She has original sources. She also reposts things that she sees about Iran, about Afghanistan, about her region, and people are going to her for news. So she still has a platform. We need to be thinking about those platforms being open, right, to people like Saleha and her sister journalists, and that there are places for them to get their story out, because I think the media conglomerates, are looking for a different kind of headline, and we don't really have that right now. So I just say to all of you who are studying this, and researchers and people, professionals in this industries, to be thinking about those social media platforms, which people do, but through the tool that Saleha and all of these journalists need for their work.
Lenny, would you like to kind of hop onto that one?
I just want to emphasize what's been said, in particular what Marlene said about networking, and keeping in mind it's easier to support people who are already established, and especially if they, have contacts within, say, the English-speaking journalist community. It's good to think about people who are younger, who are dependent on others, and in particular, just reflecting on our experience at the Kennan Institute, ethnic minorities within Russia, because we sort of talk about it's very individualized, the risk and the choices that people take, although I've observed personally that ethnic minorities are having, they don't really have the choice to travel back and forth across the border as freely as Russians do. They get stopped by the border guard and they say, hey, if you ever try to come back, that's your last time leaving. So absolutely, I just want to second everything that's been said and say, in particular, also to talk about the nuances within the groups that we're supporting.
I mean, I definitely have more questions, but if anyone in the audience has any questions, let me know, or I'm just going to keep going. I love this panel, so I could keep this going forever. Fair enough. You gave me this freedom, and now it's on you. I guess I kind of want to pivot, and I think we kind of were starting to touch on this, but the value of this. I mean, you don't have to convince me, right, that this is important, incredibly valuable work that all of us are doing, that a lot of you are contributing to. But, for an average American, they might look at that and say, like, well, I don't see the point of, giving a platform to some journalist that came over here. That's not really important to me. So I was kind of hoping to give you all a moment to sort of speak on, the value of the work that you're doing and what will come out of this, hopefully. What we're hoping to come out is what we've seen come out of this in the past and, as we're looking to the future as well. Robin, if you want to start.
I mean, lots of thoughts. I mean, the one thing that I'm really impressed by with both Lenny and Marlene is this idea of investing the long game with Russians. Because, we don't know where the future is going in that country or for those people. And I think in our news media, Americans digest foreign conflicts in terms of good versus evil and good versus bad. And I think right now, the image of a Russian is not necessarily good, right? We don't understand necessarily the nuances, and certainly we're not thinking about ethnic minorities, and we're not thinking as much about refuge as we are about for Ukrainians. So I love that you're maintaining that. The ties to Russians and helping them with their journey. I think in Afghanistan it is it's a more challenging question because we're seeing this through the eyes of it's a humanitarian issue, and we already really struggle with how to respond to humanitarian needs, and especially with the Taliban being a government where we don't really want to support them, but you have to support them. You have to work through them to support the people. So the reason that we should care, first and foremost, is because for those, I think American women's groups were one of the strongest voices during the whole previous Taliban era, saying we have to support the women of Afghanistan, and that is really where I think, and maybe that's because I run in those circles, but I think continuing to have faith groups, have civil society groups in the United States maintain a connection is, I think, what's going to be important to continue to shine a spotlight on massive humanitarian crisis that's going on there, and we should always care as being human beings. But a crowd, there's a lot crowding it out now. So I think, the more we can do to help Saleha and those that are in exile be able to then communicate that back in a form that's not integrating, that's not necessarily assimilating, but being able to effectively communicate back to the communities. Those are the kinds of things we have to really work on with our new neighbors, is how to tell their story to an audience in the way the audience wants to hear it.
Marlene.
Yeah, I think what has just been said is really important. For me, what really matters is to help the Russian diaspora to stay in touch with Russia. I think that's what many of them want. Many of them want the possibility to go back. There are more people that are traveling back and forth than we imagine, especially among the IT community. You really have several tens of thousands of people, who work a few months abroad, go back to Russia, then leave again, and so on. And so I think we need to engage them in that way as kind of intermediaries, are kind of the gateway for the gate we have to still access Russia, and to continue to hope that for many Russian students, there is the will to kind of engage. And I think on the long run, we also need to be able to see beyond the war and beyond the Putin's regime. If we want the Russian society to get transformed, we need to talk to it. right? The day the war will be finished, there will be so many memory and kind of interpretation issues that will have to be discussed very deeply inside the Russian society, that we have to engage with them, even when it's difficult, even when we disagree. And I think there are many people in Russia who are feeling very uncomfortable with the situation. And I think it's part of our job to try to engage, first to try to locate them, try to engage safely with them, and try to help those who have emigrated or who are kind of, one foot in, 1 foot out Russia, to try to stay in touch with the realities that they are happening on the ground. So I think it's a very, indeed, kind of long-term engagement to be built really baby step by baby step.
All right, and we've run out of time, unfortunately. So I want to thank Saleha. Thank you so much for taking the time to tell us about your story and letting us hear from you. And to my panelists as well, thank you for joining me today. And another round of applause for our wonderful panelists.
Thank you so much.